In the spring of 1900, Indianapolis woke before the sun, the city stretching and yawning like a living thing along the slow bend of the White River. Horse hooves clicked against brick streets still damp with the night's mist, and the smell of coal smoke drifted from stovepipes that crowned nearly every rooftop. Trolley bells rang like distant church chimes, calling shop clerks, factory hands, and schoolchildren into motion. The Soldiers' and Sailors' Monument stood at the heart of town, newly completed and gleaming, a stone compass around which the young city turned. From its observation deck, a visitor could see church steeples rising above tidy neighborhoods, rail yards stitched with iron thread, and beyond them open fields that still reminded residents this was, not long ago, prairie and farmland. Indianapolis in 1900 felt confident but unfinished, a place convinced its best years were waiting just around the corner. More than a century later, in 2026, the same city rises to the morning in a different rhythm. The river still bends, but its banks are lined with trails where runners pass under LED lights that glow like fireflies. Glass towers reflect the pink sky, and the low growl of electric buses replaces the jangle of the old trolleys. Downtown hums with data centers, sports arenas, and hospitals that resemble small cities of their own. The monument remains, but now it is surrounded by digital billboards and the steady flow of rideshare cars gliding to the curb. Indianapolis has become a crossroads not only of rail and highway, but of information, medicine, and logistics, a Midwestern capital learning how to live in a century its founders could scarcely imagine. In 1900, everyday life was measured by the limits of muscle and steam. Most Indianapolis families heated their homes with coal carried in scuttles, and evenings were lit by gas mantles that hissed softly like caged insects. A man's work often lived on his hands. Machinists at the Nordyke and Marmon plant shaping metal parts, meatpackers along Kentucky Avenue, printers setting type one letter at a time. Women kept gardens behind narrow houses and hung laundry that snapped like flags in the Indiana wind. Children walked to school past corner groceries where crackers were scooped from barrels and pickles floated in cloudy jars. The pace was slower but heavier, each task demanding sweat and patience. And the city's soundtrack was made of whistles, wagon wheels, and the constant breathing of locomotives. By 2026, the weight of daily life has shifted from the body to the screen. Many Indianapolis residents begin their mornings by checking schedules on phones that double as wallets, keys, and maps. Warehouses near the old rail corridors are filled with robots that glide across polished floors, preparing packages ordered only hours earlier. Offices in Carmel and Fishers beam employees into meetings with colleagues in Singapore and Sao Paulo, and a nurse at Riley Hospital can consult an artificial intelligence system before she ever touches a chart. Homes are warmed and cooled by quiet heat pumps, their energy drawn partly from solar fields on the outskirts of Marion County. Work still requires effort, but it is measured more often in attention than in calluses. Transportation tells the story of change more clearly than almost anything else. In 1900, the proud symbol of progress was Union Station, where iron horses arrived from Chicago, Cincinnati, and St. Louis, carrying immigrants, salesmen, and crates of new inventions. Streetcars clattered down Washington Street, their wooden seats polished by thousands of riders, while bicycles streamed along newly paved boulevards designed by city planners who believed Indianapolis should be beautiful as well as useful. Owning an automobile was a rare thrill, a noisy experiment that startled real horses and drew curious crowds whenever one sputtered past Monument Circle. In 2026, movement is faster but strangely quieter. Interstates wrap the city like concrete rivers, and the airport on the southwest side launches planes that cross oceans before a child's school day ends. The Red Line buses slide through dedicated lanes, and along the cultural trail cyclists pedal beneath public art that glows at night. Autonomous delivery vans nose up to apartment buildings, guided by satellites the size of shoeboxes orbiting far above Indiana cornfields. Yet for all the speed, commuters still complain about traffic on I-465, proving that some frustrations travel intact through time. Housing in 1900 reflected a city discovering its identity. Neighborhoods such as Woodruff Place in Irvington displayed grand homes with turrets and wide porches where families escaped the summer heat. Closer to factories stood rows of shotgun houses built for workers who needed only a short walk to the time clock. Most residences were crowded with relatives and boarders, and the idea of a private room for every child would have sounded like luxury. Streets were social stages. Neighbors traded gossip over fences, and the iceman or milkman knew each customer by name. The Indianapolis of 2026 has learned to live both upward and outward. Downtown warehouses have been reborn as lofts with exposed brick and fiber optic wiring, while new subdivisions push into once rural Hancock and Hendricks counties. Front porches have given way to backyard decks and online neighborhood groups where arguments about parking can grow hotter than any summer afternoon. Rising housing costs challenge teachers, firefighters, and young families, and the city debates how to remain welcoming without losing the character that made people fall in love with it. The search for home has become more complicated, yet the desire for belonging remains the same as it was when horse carts rattled along Meridian Street. Social structure in 1900 carried the fingerprints of the wider nation. Indianapolis was a place of opportunity for many, but not for all. African-American neighborhoods such as Indiana Avenue nurtured musicians, churches, and businesses, even as segregation limited where residents could live or work. Immigrants from Germany, Ireland, and Eastern Europe brought their languages and recipes, filling the air with the smell of rye bread and sauerbraten. Politics unfolded in smoky back rooms, and newspapers delivered opinions as confidently as they delivered facts. Community was intimate, sometimes supportive, sometimes suffocating, bound by expectations that left little room for those who did not fit the mold. By 2026, the city speaks with dozens of new accents. Refugees from Myanmar, engineers from India, and students from across Africa add their stories to the long Indianapolis narrative. Pride festivals fill downtown streets, and debates about equity echo in council chambers and coffee shops alike. Social media connects neighbors who might never have met, yet it can also divide them into digital tribes. The city wrestles openly with the legacy of redlining and with the promise of inclusion, trying to bend history toward a fairer shape. What once was whispered is now argued in public, a noisy democracy very different from the polite restraint of 1900.
Technology has been the great sculptor of this transformation. At the turn of the 20th century, a telephone was a marvel shared by an entire block, and news traveled at the speed of the morning paper. Doctors made house calls with leather bags and little more than intuition, while factory owners relied on ledgers thick with handwritten numbers. Electricity itself was still new enough to inspire newspaper editorials about whether it might harm the human nerves. In 2026, technology is the air the city breathes. Medical researchers on the IUPU iCampus design treatments tailored to a patient's DNA, and drones inspect bridges that once demanded risky climbs by ironworkers. High school students learn coding beside lessons in history, and grandparents talk to grandchildren through screens clearer than any window. The challenge is no longer access to information, but learning how to trust it, how to keep human judgment alive inside machines that seem to think for themselves. The environment surrounding Indianapolis has also changed its costume. In 1900, the White River was both blessing and burden, a source of recreation and a dumping ground for industrial waste. Summers smelled of manure from delivery horses and of smoke from factories that operated without regulation. Yet the countryside was never far away. Families could ride a few miles and find orchards buzzing with bees and skies dark with migrating birds. By 2026, cleanup efforts and new awareness have given the river a second life. Herons stalk its shallows and kayaks glide where sewage once floated. Climate change, however, brings heavier rains and hotter summers, forcing the city to rethink storm drains, tree canopies, and the very materials used to build homes. Community gardens sprout on vacant lots, echoing the kitchen plots of 1900 while pointing toward a more sustainable future. Indianapolis has learned that progress is not only about building more but about caring better for what already exists. Global significance would have sounded like a grand phrase to most residents in 1900, yet the city was already stepping onto a wider stage. Manufacturers shipped carriages and early automobiles across the country, and the first Indianapolis 500, only a decade away, would soon make the town famous to anyone who loved speed. Still, the horizon felt largely regional, tied to the fortunes of the Midwest. In 2026, Indianapolis sits at the center of networks its founders never dreamed of. The city hosts international sporting events, medical conferences, and conventions that draw visitors from every continent. Logistics companies move goods from Asia through local hubs within days, and a startup in Broad Ripple can sell software to customers it will never meet. The world has grown smaller, and Indianapolis has grown larger within it, a testament to how geography can be reinvented by imagination. Yet, amid all this change, echoes of 1900 persist like familiar melodies. The Indiana State Fair still smells of corn dogs and livestock, just as it did when Theodore Roosevelt was president. Basketball hoops hang over alley garages, and Friday nights in autumn still belong to high school football. Families gather on the 4th of July to watch fireworks burst above the same monument that watched children chasing trolley transfers more than a century ago. The city carries its memories not as museum pieces but as everyday companions. Looking from one era to the other, it is tempting to draw a straight line of progress, but the truth is more tangled. The people of 1900 believed fiercely in the future, trusting that railroads and factories would deliver comfort and justice. The residents of 2026 inherit wonders those ancestors could not picture, yet they face new uncertainties about privacy, climate, and the meaning of community. Each generation builds on the dreams and mistakes of the one before, like masons adding stones to a tower whose final height no one can predict. As evening falls in 2026, the lights of downtown Indianapolis shimmer on the White River much as lanterns once reflected on its darker waters. Somewhere beneath the asphalt lie the old brick streets, and beneath them the prairie soil that greeted the first settlers. The city has changed its clothes many times, but its heartbeat remains steady, powered by the same human hopes that guided horse-drawn wagons around Monument Circle. To compare Indianapolis in 1900 with Indianapolis in 2026 is to watch a long conversation between past and future, a reminder that places like people grow older without ever becoming entirely different. And as tomorrow waits beyond the skyline, the story continues, carried forward by millions of ordinary lives shaping, day by day, the next chapter of this enduring American city.